My parents left me a worthless painting, then I found hidden numbers behind it.
I never thought my life would change because of something so small, so ordinary. A painting, a crooked, faded thing that hung on the wall for years, collecting dust while the world moved on around it. People called it worthless. Even I called it worthless. And yet, it became the one thing that wouldn't let me go. When my parents passed, they didn't leave me much. No savings to carry me through. No grand inheritance to soften the blow of grief. Just a house filled with silence, echoes of their voices, and objects that felt heavier than they looked because every piece carried their memory. That painting was one of them. A canvas so dull that I barely noticed it. A frame so chipped that it looked ready for the trash. Out of everything they could have left me, why this? Why something that made me feel more confused than comforted? I tried to go on with life the best I could. Wake up, drag myself to work, come back home to a place that felt emptier every night. The house seemed to breathe with their absence, like every corner whispered that I was alone now. Some evenings, I'd sit in the living room staring at their things, wondering if I should keep them, or if holding on was just keeping me stuck in grief. That painting, though, it drew me in without me realizing it. My eyes would find it when I wasn't even looking for it. Something about it bothered me, like it was out of place, like it didn't belong to the rest of my parents' life. But I ignored the feeling. I told myself it was just another thing left behind. Another object that carried no answers, only memories. Until the day I saw it. The mark. At first, I thought it was just damage on the back of the frame, a scrape from being moved too many times. But when I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't random at all. It was deliberate. Etched into the wood were faint lines, numbers, not painted, not written, but carved so carefully that you would only notice them if you were searching. My chest tightened as I traced them with my fingers. It felt wrong, like I had uncovered something I wasn't supposed to see. Why would my parents leave me this? Why hide something inside an object so meaningless? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't a mistake. They wanted me to find it. Or maybe they didn't. And I had stumbled onto something that was never meant to see the light of day. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the numbers flashed in my mind. I tossed and turned, trying to convince myself it didn't matter, that I was only making grief twist into paranoia. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. The next day, I pulled the painting down from the wall. My hands trembled as I worked at the edges of the frame. Dust filled the air, and tiny fragments of wood cracked loose under my grip. And then, hidden behind the backing, something slipped out. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My heart raced as I unfolded it. Names, dates, numbers, transactions that didn't make sense at first glance, but felt heavy, loaded with meaning I hadn't yet uncovered. My throat tightened as I scanned the list, the way some names were crossed out, the way certain figures repeated like a pattern too precise to ignore. It didn't take long before I understood. These weren't random records, they were evidence. Proof of something hidden, something ugly. My stomach turned as the realization settled. My family had been tied to something much darker than I ever imagined. This wasn't just inheritance, this was a burden. I sat frozen, staring at the pages, torn between wanting to burn them and needing to know more. Grief turned to confusion. Confusion turned to fear, and fear twisted into a dangerous curiosity. The painting was no longer worthless. It was a door I had just opened, And now, I had no idea what was waiting on the other side. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the only memories I had left of my parents. I remember sitting there with the paper in my lap, staring at it until the words blurred together. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like something that belonged to me or to my family, and yet it was right there, in my hands. I kept whispering to myself, why would they hide this? Why me? But no matter how many times I asked, the silence of that empty house gave me no answers. I tried to push it aside, fold the paper back up, slide it into the frame again, pretend I had never seen it. But once you know something, once your eyes are open, you can't shut them again. Every part of me buzzed with questions I didn't want to ask, but couldn't stop asking. What did the numbers mean? Who were the names? And most of all, what had my parents been keeping from me? The next evening, I spread the papers out across the kitchen table. I smoothed every crease, traced every faded line with my fingers. Some of the names I didn't recognize, but others, they struck me with a strange familiarity. Last names I had heard whispered in town before. Names tied to families who had always seemed bitter, resentful, like they had been robbed of something no one ever talked about. The numbers looked like transactions, money amounts, debts maybe. But they didn't add up to anything that made sense. And then I saw the dates. They weren't from years ago like I expected. Some of them were recent. My parents had been keeping track of this up until the end. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just history. This was something ongoing, something alive. That's when I started noticing the little things. The phone ringing late at night, with no one on the other end when I answered. A car idling outside my house longer than it should have. People in the grocery store glancing at me, then looking away too quickly. Key they knew something I didn't. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, grief making me see shadows where there were none. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Word was spreading. Somehow, people knew I had found something. I should have stopped right there. I should have locked everything away, burned the papers, pretended the painting had never been touched. But the names pulled at me. These were people, families, who had been hurt, cheated, pushed aside. Every crossed-out name felt like a life erased. And I couldn't stop thinking, maybe this was why my parents left it to me. Maybe they wanted me to see, to understand. One night, I sat with the papers again, trying to piece together a pattern. My eyes were heavy, but I forced myself to keep going. And then, I noticed something I hadn't before. A set of numbers that looked like coordinates. My breath caught. I wrote them down, checked them against a map, and sure enough, they led to a location just outside town. I stared at the map, my heart pounding. What could possibly be out there? Why had my parents hidden these numbers so carefully? I told myself not to go, that nothing good could come from digging deeper. But curiosity is like a sickness once it takes hold. It eats at you until you have no choice but to follow it. The next day, I drove out there. The roads were empty, the air heavy with silence. When I reached the spot, it wasn't anything remarkable, just an old field, overgrown and forgotten. But the coordinates led to a specific place. A dip in the land where the grass grew taller and the soil looked disturbed. My stomach churned as I stood there, staring at the ground. I didn't dig. I couldn't. The weight of it was too much, and the fear of what I might find pressed harder than my own curiosity. But I knew then that whatever this was, it was bigger than me. Bigger than a painting. Bigger than my parent. In silence. It was something tied to history, to injustice, to pain that had been buried, literally and figuratively, for too long. Hours passed, but the terror didn't fade. I thought about the families on that list, the names scratched out as if their lives had meant nothing. I thought about the injustice buried beneath polite smiles and quiet threats. And I thought about my parents, why they never told me, why they chose to hide it until it became my burden instead. The weight of it crushed me. I felt like I was drowning in secrets I never asked for. And yet, part of me couldn't let go. If I stayed silent, I would be safe. But if I spoke the truth, I might lose everything. That night, I made a choice. I gathered the documents, every page, every scrap of evidence, and placed them in a folder. My hands shook as I held it close, as if the papers themselves carried a pulse. I knew I couldn't keep them hidden anymore. I thought about going to the police, but who could I trust? Some of the names on the list were people with power, people who could easily bury the truth again. No. If I wanted this story to live, I would have to tell it myself. But even as that thought gave me strength, the fear never left. I could feel the walls closing in, the sense that time was running out. And as I sat in the dark, folder in my lap, one thought echoed louder than the rest. If they were willing to threaten me for knowing the truth, what would they do to stop me from speaking it? I didn't have an answer, but I knew the storm was coming, and when it hit, there would be no turning back. I barely recognized myself in the mirror anymore. My eyes carried dark circles from sleepless nights. My shoulders hunched like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I used to be ordinary, just a girl working, grieving, trying to keep life together after my parents were gone. Now, every step felt like it might be my last as a free person, every choice a gamble with consequences I couldn't measure. The folder of documents never left my side. I kept it hidden in different places each night, under the floorboards, behind furniture, even inside the freezer once, just in case someone broke in. The fear of losing it, of having it ripped away before I could do anything with it, consumed me. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was truth. It was justice waiting to be spoken. But with that truth came danger I had never known before. Each day I woke up wondering if today would be the day someone tried to silence me for good. Every knock at the door made me jump. Every unknown number on my phone sent a chill down my spine. Living like that isn't really living. It's surviving in slow motion, waiting for something you can't see, but know is coming. I thought about leaving town, starting fresh somewhere else, pretending none of it had ever happened. But the names on that list haunted me. They weren't just ink on paper. They were people. Families who had been cheated, silenced, stripped of their dignity. Some of them were gone, their names crossed out like they never mattered. But others still had descendants living among us, and they deserved to know. One evening, I found myself at the edge of town, parked near a small community center. The building was old, the paint chipped, but inside it carried the heartbeat of generations, voices, stories, resilience. I sat there in my car, clutching the folder, trembling as I asked myself if I had the courage to walk in, to hand over the truth to people who had carried pain without knowing why. But fear won that night. I drove home, folder still pressed tight against my chest, tears streaming down my face. The guilt burned worse than the fear. I wanted to be brave, but the threats whispered in my ears louder than my conscience. Days blurred into nights. The harassment didn't stop. Calls, knocks, shadows outside my house. My body lived in a state of constant alert, like prey waiting for the predator's strike. And yet, Through it all, a fire was building in me. Quiet at first, then stronger. A fire that came from realizing that if I gave in, if I stayed silent, then all the injustice tied to that painting would remain buried. And maybe that was exactly what those people wanted. The turning point came one afternoon when I was walking down the street. An older woman I barely knew stopped me. Her eyes studied me carefully. Then she whispered, "I heard you found something. Something about us." Her voice trembled. There was no threat, no anger, only hope. That word sliced through me like a blade. Hope. All this time, I had been drowning in fear, but in her voice, I heard something else, the possibility that the truth might actually heal, not just hurt. That night, I spread the papers out again. I lit a single lamp, the house otherwise dark, and I started reading each name aloud. One by one, I spoke them into the empty room, as if giving them back the dignity that had been taken. My voice shook. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going. Every name mattered. Every name deserved to be heard. And then I knew what I had to do. I gathered everything. The folder, the painting, my notes, and I recorded myself telling the story. My voice cracked. My hands trembled, but I spoke anyway. I told it all. What I had found, what it meant, and why it couldn't stay hidden any longer. It was dangerous. I knew the moment those words left my lips, there would be no undoing it. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. Because the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. As I sat there in the glow of the lamp, exhausted but resolute, one thought pulsed through me. My parents hadn't left me a burden. They had left me a choice, and I was finally ready to make it. The night I decided to tell the story, I didn't know what would happen. I only knew there was no turning back. The fear still lived inside me, heavy as ever, but it was joined by something stronger. Resolve. For weeks, I had let the threats and the silence of others dictate my choices, but not anymore. I uploaded my recording anonymously, not to the police, not to the people who had threatened me, but to the world. I spoke every word into the quiet night, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry the weight of the truth. I showed the documents, the names, the numbers, the painting that had been dismissed as worthless. I laid it all bare, and when I finally pressed send, my chest felt like it had cracked open. The hours afterwards stretched endlessly. I sat in the dark, waiting for a knock, a call, some sign that I had crossed the line. But what came instead was silence. A silence so deep, it scared me even more. The next day, the silence broke. Messages flooded in, from strangers, from neighbors, from people who had carried unanswered questions for years. Some thanked me, some were angry, and some shared stories of loss, pain, and betrayal that lined up exactly with the names on those papers. Families torn apart, land taken, promises broken, all buried beneath smiles and polite lies. It wasn't just history, it was living memory. And just like that, the painting wasn't just a relic from my parents' house anymore. It was a mirror held up to the community, forcing everyone to see what they had ignored for generations. The backlash came too, as I knew it would. Whispers behind my back turned into open hostility. People I thought I knew crossed the street to avoid me. Anonymous threats poured into my phone and mailbox. There were days when I wondered if speaking out had been a mistake. Days when the fear of being alone nearly swallowed me whole. But then I'd remember the voices of those who reached out. The woman who told me her grandfather had been cheated out of land. The man who said his mother's name had been erased from records with no explanation. Their pause. In had lived in silence for too long, and if my voice could give it shape, then it was worth it. I started attending gatherings at the community center, the same place I couldn't bring myself to enter before. This time, I walked in holding the folder, holding the painting, my hands trembling but open. I read the names aloud again, this time not just to myself, but to a room full of people who had waited years to hear them. The air was heavy with tears, anger, and something else. Healing. In that room, I understood what my parents had done. They hadn't hidden the truth to protect themselves. They had kept it safe until someone, me, was ready to face it. Maybe they hadn't been brave enough to tell it themselves. Or maybe they had known that the time wasn't right. But when they left me that painting, they gave me the choice, and I chose not to stay silent. It didn't fix everything. Pain that deep doesn't vanish with one story, one folder of documents, or one girl's voice. But it cracked the silence. It opened the door. And sometimes, that's enough to start change. Even now, when I walk down the street, I feel the weight of eyes on me. Some filled with resentment, others with quiet gratitude. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if the threats will ever stop, or if the truth will ever bring full justice. But I do know this. Silence would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been right. And in the end, the truth demands to be heard, no matter the cost. That painting was never worthless. It was a warning, a burden, and a gift all at once. And every time I see it now, I remember the question that still haunts me. How many more stories are out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to uncover them? And when they finally come to light, will we be ready to listen?